Hello, horror stories. My name is Williams, and I have been a shipper for many years. My son convinced me to share this experience, which, without a doubt, is the most disturbing I have ever experienced. Although it may seem hard to believe, I know that there are many people who have gone through similar things, but without telling anyone. Only when you experience something like this do you realize that they are real and that evil may be just around the corner. Throughout my career, I have had many experiences both day and night, but never one like this. In the 80s, he worked in a construction company delivering goods. At that time, the company provided the trucks, so when I was young, I got my driving license and started working there on the recommendation of a friend. I spent 20 years doing the same thing, driving on the roads of the United States, generally in the north of the country. Back then, there was no GPS or cell phones. We made the routes with the help of maps until we learned the route by heart. We communicated among colleagues only through the trailer radio, but many times the signal was lost when we were driving in the mountains or in deep places in the forest. On one of those occasions, one night I got lost. I remember it was winter, a cold night. I stopped to look at the map. I checked it again and again, but I couldn't locate where I was. It was a new client's route, so he had been studying the route, but something had gone wrong. Darkness invaded the forest. Only the sounds of the environment could be heard. The trees were very tall and the dirt road was quite narrow. Of course, there was no signage whatsoever. I could barely see a few meters with the truck's lights. I tried to use the truck's radio to ask one of my companions for guidance, but there was no signal. I started to get desperate. He couldn't turn the truck on such a narrow road, and he didn't know where he was going, or if he would find a way out. Furthermore, I was afraid of wasting too much time and not being able to deliver the goods. I didn't know what to do, so I kept driving, hoping to find a nearby exit or a town where I could ask my location and continue on my way. Although I was afraid of not finding anyone because it was late at night, I continued. I don't know how much time passed, but I covered several kilometers at very low speed, which took me more than 30 minutes. Suddenly, in the distance, I saw a light. At first, I didn't know where it came from, but I knew it was a good sign. It meant that he had found a town or a house where he could ask for help. I felt very relieved. I would finally get out of there. However, the closer I got, I noticed that it was a very old and quite abandoned cabin, located about 100 meters into the forest in the middle of nowhere. As I approached, I noticed that the light bulb at the entrance to the cabin was flickering. Anyway, I parked the truck and got out. Going into the forest to get to that place, I had no other alternative. The atmosphere became very thick as I approached. The trees seemed to get closer to me and the air became colder and thicker. I could hear the rustling of the branches under my feet and the howling of the wind through the treetops. The noises of the forest were very imposing. I continued walking slowly, and when I was almost at the door, I realized that it was in worse condition than what I had initially seen from the truck. The windows were broken and the door was hanging from one of its hinges. Despite everything, the flickering light outside was still on. I took a deep breath, and just as I was about to knock on the door, I heard noises coming from the back of the cabin. I decided to go around it and look out a back window, where there was barely a faint light coming out. As I approached and looked inside, I did not expect to witness the most evil and grotesque thing my eyes had ever seen in my entire life. There was an old woman in a white nightgown, her long gray hair falling messily as she rocked in an old rocking chair. On a nearby shelf, a red candle flickered, barely illuminating the room with a dim, sinister light. The most dismal thing was seeing what he had in his hands, a human head without eyes, which he combed with a disturbing tenderness. I quickly ducked to avoid being seen, fighting the urge to scream and run out of there in a hurry. My legs were visibly shaking from the extreme terror I felt, struggling to stay calm. I knew I had to leave without the old lady seeing me. My heavy breathing was the only thing that broke the silence of the night, even without barely moving. I carefully backed away from the cabin, listening to the crunch of branches under my feet as I stopped briefly to make sure he wasn't listening. I kept going until I was far away and sure I could get up and run to my truck, parked a few feet away. I wanted to avoid passing directly in front of the cabin, so although the road was narrow, I opted to go a little further into the woods with the truck so I could maneuver and turn around. While backing up, I stepped on some branches that got stuck in the wheels, causing a loud noise. I knew that the old woman had surely heard it. I tried to accelerate, but the branches had gotten too stuck in the rear wheels and it was impossible. I looked towards the cabin in panic, fearing that the woman would notice my presence at any moment. In fact, he was looking at me from the window without moving, as if he was enjoying the scene. I continued trying to free myself from the traffic jam. I got out of the truck to remove some branches that were blocking the rear wheels. After I made it, I climbed back up and went full throttle, but I was still stuck. When I turned to look in the rearview mirror, the old woman was gone. I almost ran out of the truck, not knowing what else to do. In a new attempt, I managed to free it by dragging some remains of branches. I knew it by the noise that the branches made when dragging on the asphalt, but finally I was able to get out. I walked away from there at full speed, without looking back. However, a few minutes later, when I got over what I was experiencing, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the old woman chasing me. I didn't understand how he could catch up with me at the speed he had at that age. I thought I was hallucinating because of the fear I felt, until at one point she stopped and I saw her rising more than a meter from the ground, suspended in the air with her arms open. I was shocked, I don't know how, but every time I saw her, she got closer and closer. It was clear to me that if he reached me, he could suffer the same misfortune as the head he was holding of what looked like a man. I don't know how long I drove until I finally emerged onto the state highway again. I almost got hit coming out of a curve, and that's when I reacted and slowed down, first making sure the woman wasn't coming after me. My hands were firmly gripped on the steering wheel, but I couldn't stop shaking. I was in such an intense state of nerves that I couldn't continue driving like that. I decided to go as far away as possible in search of a roadside hotel, still scared by the possibility that that old woman would appear again. Finally, that night I stayed in a hotel, or at least for the rest of the night. I asked the receptionist if I could borrow her phone, and the first thing I did was call my boss. I knew I would have to explain to him why I wouldn't deliver the goods on time, but I didn't have the courage to tell him exactly what had happened to me. I assumed he wouldn't believe me, that he would think I was crazy or that I had used some kind of substance. I decided not to take that risk. Although despite everything that happened, I understood that an accident can happen to anyone. Although he got quite angry, he assured me that he would call the customer himself to confirm a new delivery time. However, he made it clear to me that I had to deliver the merchandise first thing the next day, without delaying another minute. I thanked him and asked him at the hotel what was the quickest route to get to my destination and stay on schedule. Fortunately, I didn't have to go through the same path again. I don't know how I ended up there. I wasn't even heading towards my original destination. I couldn't find a rational explanation for what I had seen and experienced that night, and to this day I can't get over it. However, one thing is for sure. I will never forget that paranormal experience, and of course, I will always avoid any route or place that reminded me of that terrible encounter. Be very careful on the roads at night, because there will always be something or someone stalking us. If you have enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time.